Hello, it's Pastor Doug, and I'm here to share with you another folk tale, another Jack tale. This is one that comes from over the seas, and it's called Jack and the Silver Keys. Now, there was a time whenever Jack was a growing up. His brothers Will and Tom had already gone off to seek their fortune, and Jack was just hanging around the house. And since they was gone, why, Jack never did anything around except for his own chores. So he never plowed the field, and it just got worse and worse and worse to the point that it was just almost no good at all. And he didn't take care of the animals, and little by little it got to the point they just didn't have none. And why, Jack was just getting kind of tired with everything that was around there, and he went to his mama and says, my brothers have gone off to seek their fortunes, and it's probably time for me to do the same. But his mama said, oh, Jack, you don't need to be going nowhere. Why, there's plenty of fortune to have right here. Why, all you got to do is just turn this farm into a good productive farm again. And it's going to need a lot of work out there. In fact, if you just get to where you're the one who's plowing and you're the one who's taking care of all the animals, well, I'll take care around the house here. And by then, you'll get to be having a great fortune. Well, Jack thought about that to himself, and he says, well, I guess that's a pretty good idea. I guess the first thing I ought to do is get out there and plow the field. And to do that, I'm going to have to go borrow me some plows and horses and stuff like that. And so Jack went off to one of the neighboring farmers that he'd worked with in the past when he was a growing up. And he was glad to lend Jack a pair of horses and a plow, especially when he found out that he was the one that was going to be plowing it. He says, oh, you got good land over there. Your daddy got some of the best land. And why, it just hadn't been plowed for years and days. And in fact, whenever Tom was doing it, he didn't even do the whole of what your daddy did. And so you ought to get out there and plow it all. And so Jack just started envisioning not just a little farm, but a big farm, a productive farm, a fruitful farm, and a future for himself. Well, he got out there and he started a plowing away, and after one row it turned into another, but he had to take him time because there was rocks and weeds and things he had to climb up, and that farmer was glad to let him have that plow for just about as long as he needed it. Why, when he got onto that new part of ground that his brother hadn't been a plowing, he went to a part where he hit something with his plow, and he went back to it thinking it was a rock, and whenever he reached down to pull it out, it was a ring with 3 silver keys. And not the little tiny keys, but these great big old silver keys. Jack didn't know what to do with it. He just decided right there he ought to go tell his mom about it. He got them keys and put them in his pocket. He took them horses into the barn, set the plow together, and then he went in and said, Mama, you're not going to believe what I just found. Why, I just found some keys. And she says, oh, Jack, no. Tell me no. He says, yes, I did. I found these keys right here. And he pulled them out and showed those keys. And his mama says, oh, Jack, you don't know what you found. He goes, well, I do know what I found. Why, I found these silver keys. And she says, no, Jack, let me tell you the story. So Jack's mama sat him down and told him the story of those keys. There had been a time when Jack's daddy was a pretty young man. They just got on to the land, and he and his brothers were just little old boys discovering and playing and having a good time whenever the king came by to go hunting out in his kingdom. Why, he knew that out there on that good bit of land that they had, that there was good hunting, and the king came through, and the king always had a set of keys on his hip, 3 silver keys. And while he was on that hunt, he lost those keys. And ever since then, the king had grown cold and grown old and grown sad. Why, he stayed there nearly a whole month trying to find those keys and never did find them. He finally went back to his castle and got there and got to his big house and just kind of trying to live life without those keys. He never told anybody what they unlocked, but he was mighty upset that they was gone. And in time, Jack's daddy said that he would surely find those keys. In fact, Jack's daddy became obsessed about it. He quit taking care of the farm, and he quit taking care of the cattle. He quit taking care of the sheep. He didn't do no work at all. He spent day and night looking and hunting for those keys. He looked everywhere, turned over every rock he could find, looked under every bush that was on the place. He did everything he was able to do and never did find them. His mama told Jack that she was sure it was the death of him. Why, he just went from looking there to looking to wherever the king was at, because they had to be somewhere. And why he took off looking for those keys, they'd never seen him again. And she says, Jack, I just don't want anything like that happening to you. You need to keep your mind. In fact, those keys aren't yours. They're the king. He says, well, now that I've heard that story, Mama, I guess I ought to go give them back to the king. And so that's exactly what he decided to do. Now, it took a while for Jack to get there, and on his way, why, he didn't look the very best by the time he got there. Why, his old clothes was tattered a little bit, because they never did have a whole lot of money. And when he got there, why, even though the king's men and the guards at the gates and all those guys recognized who Jack was, they were saying, what do you want to be around here for, Jack? What are you going to be doing? He says, well, I got something here for the king. I'd like to give it to him. He says, oh, you do? Why don't you just give it to me, and then I'll give it to the king? He says, oh, no, I can't trust you with that. No, I want to give it to him myself, because I got a message that I need to deliver with it. Oh, well, you can just tell me, and I'll tell the king. Why, they got into a heated discussion and all going on about it, Jack wanting to do it one way and the guard wanting to do it another. And then pretty soon, between both of them not realizing it, the king just come up behind them. So what's all this hubbubaloo? What are you guys all fighting about? And so one said to the other, and they finally got out their story, and the king says, oh, Jack, you got something to tell me, do you? You got something to give to me? Why, that's mighty nice. Why don't you just come in with me? And so the king brought him into his great big old house, sat him down. He says, oh, now, Jack, before we get to this business about receiving whatever it is you might be able to give to a king, why don't we just sit down here and have a drink? And Jack says, oh, I ain't never had no drink like that. We's pretty far poor out there on that farm. We don't have extra money for that kind of a thing. He says, oh, okay, Jack, well, I'll just get you something you're used to. And got him a nice, cool glass of water, and they sat there and visited. And he tried to find out about his brothers and how his mama was a-doing and all those sorts of things. And finally, Jack says, oh, I've enjoyed it pretty good with you here, but I got to go ahead and give you what I found. And Jack pulled out those silver keys. And when he did, the king's eyes just grew huge and wide. He says, oh, Jack, you don't know what you got there. And Jack says, well, I do. I got your keys. I don't know what they open, but I know that they were as important to you. And when I found them, I just wanted to give them back to you. He says, oh, I reckon that you're interested in the reward. He says, oh, no, what's yours is yours, and it should be there. I shouldn't be rewarded for doing what's right. No, sir. He says, well, Jack, then you ought to at least stay the night. Let me help you out with the things that I need to give you and just reward you. At least have a good night here. In fact, I'd like to have you stay here for 20 days. He says, well, that's an awful long time. I don't know if my mama would get away with it. He goes, oh, well, you just get up there and I'll send one of my men up to let your mama know that you're going to stay here and you're going to enjoy my company. And you're going to enjoy all the things that I have here for 20 days, and then I'll let you go. Why, Jack thought that's okay. And so the guard went up to tell his mama, and Jack got shown to a room, and the king brought in everybody and let them know that Jack should have the run of the place, and that the king was going to go on himself for a little journey, and he'd be back in 20 days. Why, the next morning the king got up and left, and after he was gone, Jack got himself to a nice breakfast, and why, he didn't know what to do, so he just lived and had a good day. And that night he got to himself to his chamber, and he closed the door. And into the evening of the night, there was a knock on it. Jack went up and opened it up, and there was the queen, all in her beauty and her glory, and she come right into Jack's room and closed the door behind her. She says, "Jack, you don't know what you've done." She says, "Well, I just gave the king back what was his. What do you mean? What's wrong with that?" She says, "Oh, Jack, you've ruined me. That's what you've done. Don't you know what those those silver keys are for?" And Jack says, "No, I don't know what they unlock. I figure that's the king's business." And she says, "Well, Jack, let me tell you what you've done." And so Jack sat down, and the queen sat down. And he says, "Those keys were made just for Jack from an old blue-bearded man that lived here for some days and years ago. We had never seen him since, but he made a place that those keys would unlock. It was a special place where there was 3 guards that gated it in. You had to have all 3 keys to get past each gate, and when you got to the inside, it was a place where for every day you stayed, it would take a year off of your life. And if the king's going to stay there for 20 days, he's going to come back 20 years younger. And me, I'm still going to be 20 years older, and he's not going to have anything to do with me. He's going to want to get rid of me and get himself some younger wife to be his king. And so you've ruined me. That's what you've done." And as she talked about it, she got angrier and she got upset, and she finally knocked on the door and had the guards come in and pointed at Jack and said, "He's offended me, and you need to take him to the dungeon." And so that's exactly what happened. Jack got sent down to the dungeon. And while he was down there, the queen decided that she just needed to hang Jack. Why, they hadn't had a hanging in those parts for years and years, and poor Jack was going to be the first one. Why, she set up the gallows, and she set up everything to have a great big old hanging, and it took a while to get there, and poor Jack just wasted away down in the dungeon. Why, one day turned into the next, and by the time that everything was ready, he was just as sore as could be. He couldn't believe his bad luck. Here he was trying to do a good thing, and everything was just as bad as it could be. And so sure enough, that day finally came when he was drug out of the dungeons, and he was brought out into the light, and he was brought before a whole bunch of people from the town who was gathered around. Even Jack's poor old mama had come down to see and hear, because she had heard all that was going on, tears in her eyes for what was a-happening. And Jack was led up to the gallows, and the fella that was about to hang him asked him if he had anything to say. He says, "Oh, I've been lied about. I didn't do nothing that the queen had said. All I ever did was help the king and give him back what was his, and I'm a-suffering for it." Why, he went on for a little bit, and about the time that old hangman was about to put the noose around Jack's neck, why, there was a commotion at the back. And you could hear people hollering, "Make way for the king! Make way for the king!" And sure enough, everybody made way. The hanging was stopped, and here come in this younger man that nobody quite recognized. And as he began to greet one another, they recognized his voice, but he was a mighty bit younger looking man, and they all knew there was some magic a-working on him. He made his way up, and he said, "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry what happened to you while I was away. Oh, I can't believe that the queen got upset with you and throwed you into prison, and now trying to hang you like this. I'll make sure that she gets her justice for the way that she's treated you." And Jack didn't know what to say, but he was willing to go with the king to get off that old platter where they was going to hang him from. The king took him and brought him into his house and cleaned him all up and had a big meal that was set before him. And then he brought in the queen, and she was just a weeping and a crying and carrying on. And the king stood up and said, "Oh, hush yourself. Look what you've done. Oh, you've taken this fella who has helped me out and given me what I've been looking for and longing for days and years and years and days. Why, he's done something good for me, and look at you. Why did you treat him that way?" She says, "Oh, I knew what those keys were for. You told me about them in your grief of having to lose them, and I knew what was going to happen. And here you are, a younger man, and now you're going to want a younger queen, and you're not going to want anything to do with me." And he said, "Well, what made you ever think that?" "Why, I was going to send you there next so that you could be just the same age with me. But not right immediately. Why, I'm going to send you down into that same dungeon, and you're going to spend 20 days down there a-suffering and a-hurting and a-starving, a-living with the rats and a-living in your own mess, just like poor Jack had to do." And the queen just couldn't believe it. Why, the king called his guardsmen, and they took the queen, and they took her right down to that dungeon. And Jack just looked at the king, and he says, "Oh, king, why, I wouldn't be able to go home and knowing that the queen was down there in the dungeon, having to live like I lived for 20 days. No, 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 no. I just can't bear the thought of it. Why, you need to let her go." And the king says, "Let her go? Why, she nearly hung you, Jack. She was going to kill you because she was so afraid of what was going to happen to her." And he says, "Oh, I know what she was going to do, and I just have to tell you that I'm just willing to forgive her for it. Why, I just don't want happening to her what happened to me. No, sirree. Why would you just give her another chance and you forgive her, and I'll be good with that, and I'll get on to my home, because I got plenty of work to be doing up there. Well, I got visions for a great place for me, and I'm going to have a farm that's going to take me into the future." Why, the king says, "I can't believe it. Why, Jack, you're a better man than me. Why, I just can't believe you're just willing to forgive her like that." He says, "Oh, but I am, king, I am. I'm willing to forgive her." And so the king says, "Well, if you're willing to forgive her, I'm willing too." And so the king called for the queen to be brought up after her one day in the prison. And she was a mighty humble. And she says, "Oh, king, what do you want to do to me now? Why, are you going to hang me like I was going to hang poor Jack?" And he says, "No. No, in fact, poor Jack is the reason you're here. Why, he just can't bear the thought of you being down there in that dungeon, and he's already ready to forgive you, and I wanted you to hear it from his own lips." And so Jack told the queen right there and then that he had forgiven her, and he didn't want to hear nothing about it ever again, and that he just wanted her to live right with the king, and he could be on his way. And they say that the queen went and spent her 20 days, and that king and that queen lived together. Why, they didn't visit that place very often, but ever so often they'd go back in, and they say that they just might be ruling there today. But Jack, why, he lived a different future. He got that place, and he lived with his mom, and he figured out how to do some good old-fashioned hard-working farming. He turned that same place into a great big old farm where he grew crops, and he had cattle, and he lived a right good old life. His mama lived as long as she could, and she went on, and when she did, why, Jack lived on himself, raising a great, big, beautiful family, because eventually, if you've heard any other Jack tales, that he ended up marrying one of the king's daughters, and they lived a happy, right life. Now, I tell you that story because the Bible talks a lot about forgiveness. And sometimes, whenever we're fearful, we don't always want to forgive. But God says we are to grace the people around us with the same forgiveness that He gives us. And He gives us a tremendous grace and forgiveness that we can't restore and we could never repay. And we ought to extend that to those around us. And that's the end of that.